Some buildings inspire awe, others leave us uneasy. Architecture has the power to lift us up or to trap us. It can confuse us with twisting hallways, amaze us with floating towers, or harm us by erasing cultures and displacing communities. In architecture that shouldn't exist, we explore designs that defy logic, laugh at gravity, and cross ethical lines. From mythical towers to futuristic floating cities, we uncover the hidden costs behind bold visions. Each structure tells a story, revealing what we value and what we sacrifice. And with every story we ask, should this exist? People have always built to survive. A roof keeps the rain away. Walls keep out the cold and the wild. At first, that was enough. A hut, a tent, a simple shelter gave protection and a place to rest. But soon, survival turned into something else. A house became more than wood or stone. It became a way to show strength, wealth, or belief. A temple rose higher than any tree. A palace spread wider than a village. A bridge stretched across a river, not just across it, but to prove it could be done. The drive to build the impossible comes from somewhere deep. People see a mountain and wonder what it would be like to stand on top. They look at an empty sky and imagine something reaching into it. This is not just about need. It's about power, ambition, and imagination. When someone builds what others call unbuildable, they rewrite the rules of what can exist. In the old story of the Tower of Babel, people decide to build a tower so tall it will touch heaven. They gather bricks, lift them higher and higher, and believe they can reach the realm of gods. The story ends in ruin, not because the tower falls, but because the builders themselves fall apart. Their voices turn into a jumble of languages, and they can no longer work together. The tale warns about pride and punishment, but it also shows something else. Even in myth, humans dream of pushing beyond the limits set for them. The Tower of Babel was never just a tower. It was a challenge to the sky. Centuries later, builders in medieval Europe faced a similar dream. They wanted to create places that drew the eye upward, places where stone seemed to float. Gothic cathedrals rose like forests of stone, with spires reaching higher than anyone thought possible. The builders used flying buttresses and pointed arches, new tools for new ambitions. People walked inside and felt small beneath the soaring ceilings. The walls glowed with colored light from stained glass windows. These cathedrals were not only places of worship, they were acts of faith in human skill and vision. Each stone whispered the same message: we can make heaven here on earth. But why keep pushing? Why risk failure or even death to build what seems impossible? Some of it comes from competition. A ruler wants to outdo his rival. A city wants the tallest tower, the longest bridge, the grandest hall. Some of it comes from the desire to leave a mark. A builder knows that one day his body will be gone, but a monument may stand for centuries. And some of it is simply curiosity. What happens if we try this? Can stone bend like this? Can steel hold this weight? The unknown pulls at the mind like gravity pulls at the earth. This drive to defy the limits of building falls into three kinds of challenges. The first is defying logic. A structure might seem to break the rules of reason itself. Think of a staircase that spirals without end, or a building shaped like a wave frozen in midair. At first glance, the mind says it cannot work. Then the builder shows how it does. This kind of defiance is about ideas as much as materials. It asks the question, can we see the world differently? The second is defying gravity. Here, the challenge is physical. Humans have always wanted to go higher, span greater distances, or create larger open spaces. The pyramids of Egypt were heavy and stable, built with weight as their strength. The Eiffel Tower turned that idea upside down, using light iron beams to reach into the sky. Modern skyscrapers use steel and glass to climb even higher. Bridges leap across canyons, held up by cables thinner than a wrist. These feats make people hold their breath because they seem to hang between earth and sky. Gravity never goes away. It waits for mistakes. The third kind of defiance is more subtle. It is defying ethics. Sometimes what makes a building impossible is not its shape or height, but the cost of creating it. A palace built with forced labor, a dam that floods villages, a stadium that takes money from schools and hospitals. In these cases, the question is not, can we build this? But should we? The builders may succeed, but at a price hidden in shadows. The drive to build the unbuildable is not always noble. Sometimes it comes from greed or fear. A king may want a monument to his own glory, even if his people starve. A company may cut corners to meet a deadline, risking collapse. But even when the motives are mixed, the act of building carries its own meaning. Every great structure is a story told in stone, steel, or wood. It speaks of the dreams and struggles of the people who made it. Picture a small group of workers in a medieval village, laying stones for a cathedral they will never live to see finished. They do not know the names of the architects or the patrons. They only know the work. Each stone they place fits into something larger than themselves. Centuries later, tourists will stand in awe under the same vaulted roof. The builders are gone, but their vision remains, solid and silent. Or imagine a modern engineer staring at a computer model of a bridge that will cross a deep gorge. She knows the math says it will hold, but she also knows one miscalculation could bring it all down. The day the last piece is set in place, she stands beneath the span and feels both pride and fear. In that moment, she is connected to the same force that drove the builders of Babel and the cathedrals. Humans build, not just to live, but to challenge the limits of what is possible. Sometimes those limits are physical, like weight and height. Sometimes they are social, like laws and ethics. And sometimes they are in the mind, in the very way we see the world. The drive to build the impossible is the drive to make the invisible visible, to take a dream and give it shape. Even when the tower falls, the dream remains, ready for someone else to try again. Some buildings feel wrong the moment you step inside. You open a door and expect to see a hallway, but there's a wall instead. You take 3 steps forward and find yourself back where you started. Windows face inward. Stairs lead nowhere. The space seems to bend and twist, not in a way that defies physics, but in a way that defies the mind. This is the realm of illogical architecture. It is not about failure or bad planning alone. It is about spaces that turn against the rules we rely on to make sense of the world. For most buildings, form follows function. A kitchen has a stove and sink arranged for cooking. A hospital has clear paths so patients can be moved quickly. A library has quiet corners and open tables for reading. These patterns help us understand where we are and what we can do there. When design breaks from this logic, confusion takes its place. Illogical architecture happens when form does not match purpose, when a space refuses to behave the way it should. Sometimes this break is deliberate. Artists and architects may want to challenge people's expectations. They create buildings that act like riddles. You enter and feel lost, and that feeling is part of the design. Other times, the chaos is accidental. A building grows through years of poor planning, with one wing added here, another hall added there, until nothing connects in a clear way. Whether by intent or mistake, the result is the same: a place that unsettles. Imagine walking into a house where every doorframe is slightly too low. You have to duck again and again as you move from room to room. The walls seem to close in on you, not enough to trap you, but enough to make you tense. Now picture a hotel where every floor plan is different. Room numbers jump from 101 to 236 with nothing in between. Stairs skip levels, and elevators open onto blank walls. Even if you know nothing is dangerous, your body reacts as if it is. This is how illogical design works. It turns safe spaces into puzzles you cannot solve. The human mind depends on order. We create mental maps of places as we move through them. When you enter a supermarket, you expect to find aisles lined in neat rows. If the layout changes every visit, you feel disoriented. The same thing happens on a larger scale in buildings. When paths do not match your mental map, your brain works harder. This effort causes stress and even fear. You might feel trapped, as if the building itself is playing a trick on you. This effect has been studied in hospitals and schools. Patients in confusing layouts take longer to find their rooms. Lost visitors feel anxious and frustrated. In schools, students may feel distracted or unsettled if classrooms and hallways do not follow a clear plan. Even if the building is safe, the lack of logic creates tension. Chaos in design becomes chaos in the mind. Some architects use this effect on purpose. Surrealist designers in the 20th century rejected straight lines and clear forms. They wanted to create spaces that felt like dreams, where familiar shapes appeared in strange ways. A door might float above the floor. A staircase might spiral into a ceiling without an opening. These choices were not accidents. They were meant to make visitors question their sense of reality. Walking through such a space feels like stepping into a painting or a dream. The artist M.C. Escher never built physical structures, but his drawings capture the spirit of illogical architecture. His famous staircases twist in impossible ways. People walk up and down at the same time, each unaware of the other. The drawings are tricks of perspective, yet they feel like places that could almost exist. Many architects have taken inspiration from Escher, creating buildings that echo his illusions. A staircase might seem to rise forever before suddenly turning back on itself. A bridge might appear to float without support, only to reveal hidden structures when seen from a different angle. Not all illogical spaces are artistic. Some are simply broken. Picture a public housing project built in a rush. The designers cut costs by using identical blueprints over and over, but each site has slightly different terrain. Doors open onto staircases that lead into walls. Narrow hallways meet at odd angles. Elevators stop half a floor away from their destinations. The people who live there must adapt, but the space never feels right. The dysfunction becomes part of daily life, a constant source of frustration. There is also a difference between playful confusion and harmful confusion. A funhouse at a carnival bends mirrors and tilts floors to make people laugh. Visitors know they are safe, and the disorientation lasts only a few minutes. But in a hospital, that same disorientation could be dangerous. A nurse running to an emergency cannot afford to get lost. In this case, illogical design is more than a nuisance. It puts lives at risk. Consider a modern museum built by a famous architect. The building is stunning from the outside, with sweeping curves and daring angles. Inside, however, the layout is a maze. Visitors wander for hours without finding certain exhibits. Signs do little to help because they are placed where people cannot see them until it is too late. The confusion might be part of the artistic intent, a way to make the museum itself part of the experience. But for a visitor who came to see a specific piece of art, the design becomes a barrier. What feels like genius to one person feels like carelessness to another. This tension between intent and outcome lies at the heart of illogical architecture. A building may aim to provoke thought, to challenge the user's sense of space, but it may also create stress and alienation. The line between art and dysfunction is thin. One person's masterpiece is another person's nightmare. In some cities, old neighborhoods grow without central planning. Streets twist and narrow, houses lean over alleys, and signs point in conflicting directions. Walking through such a place can feel like exploring a labyrinth. Tourists may find it charming, while residents know every shortcut and dead end by heart. Here, the illogic is not designed, but evolved. The space reflects generations of change, a physical record of lives layered on top of one another. The most striking examples of illogical architecture mix both intent and accident. Imagine a luxury hotel built with bold, surrealist shapes. Years later, new owners add extra rooms and emergency exits. Each addition bends the original design further. Guests find themselves in spaces that feel like puzzles, half art and half mistake. They cannot tell where the architect's vision ends and the later confusion begins. Illogical architecture speaks to the fragile balance between order and chaos. A space can guide, comfort, and protect, or it can unsettle and confuse. When form and function split apart, the mind struggles to keep up. Some buildings do this deliberately, like Escher's drawings brought to life. Others stumble into it through neglect or poor planning. In both cases, the result is the same: a place where every step feels uncertain, and the walls themselves seem to whisper questions you cannot answer. A woman walks through a house she built, but cannot escape. Sarah Winchester, widow of the man who made the Winchester rifle, believed the spirits of those killed by the gun haunted her. She thought the only way to keep them at bay was to keep building, never stopping, never finishing. Day and night, workers added rooms, hallways, and staircases to her mansion in California. Some staircases rise into ceilings with no opening. Some doors open into walls or lead to sudden drops outside. Windows sit in the middle of floors. The house feels less like a home and more like a labyrinth designed by fear itself. Visitors still wander the Winchester Mystery House today. They get lost in its twists and turns, feeling the same confusion Sarah must have felt. Every strange detail tells a story of grief and obsession. The endless construction gave her a sense of control. But the result was a place with no clear purpose. It shows what happens when expansion happens for its own sake. A building grows, but meaning does not grow with it. The house is a physical record of a mind trying to solve a problem it cannot solve. In a different way, many modern offices repeat this mistake. Companies expand and remodel as they grow, adding new sections without a plan. Hallways curve and double back. Departments spread across different wings with no clear route between them. Meeting rooms sit in random spots, sometimes hidden behind storage areas. The confusion slows everyone down. Workers spend extra time finding coworkers or navigating to a meeting. Signs help a little, but not enough. The human cost is easy to overlook until it becomes too heavy. A worker lost on their way to a presentation feels stress rise in their chest. A new hire spends the first week wandering like a ghost, unsure where anything is. Even seasoned employees lose minutes every day, just moving from place to place. Over time, this frustration builds. Burnout does not come only from workload, but also from the constant low-level strain of navigating a space that fights back. Productivity drops, and so does morale. What might have been solved by clear design turns into a hidden drain on the company's energy. Some companies create maze-like layouts on purpose, believing it will spark creativity. The idea is that random encounters will lead to new ideas. In reality, it often leads to frustration. A programmer looking for a quiet space to focus finds herself walking past loud break rooms and crowded hallways. A manager who needs to speak with two teams in different areas wastes precious time weaving between them. The building becomes a barrier rather than a tool. Illogical design does not only happen inside buildings. Entire cities can confuse the people who live in them. In the 1960s, Brazil built a new capital city from scratch, Brasília. From the air, it looks like an airplane or a bird. The layout was meant to be futuristic and symbolic. Government buildings sit in one wing, residential areas in another, and commercial zones along the body. On paper, it seems organized. On the ground, it feels alien. Streets stretch too wide for walking. Landmarks that look close on a map turn out to be separated by highways. Residents often rely on cars even for short trips, and pedestrians feel stranded. Visitors get lost because the city's design does not match human scale. Brasília shows how a plan can be logical to its creators, but illogical to the people who must live within it. Japan's capsule hotels tell a different story about space. In cities where land is scarce and expensive, efficiency becomes the main goal. Capsule hotels offer small sleeping pods stacked like drawers. Each pod holds only a bed and maybe a small screen. Guests climb ladders or squeeze through narrow passages to reach their space. For some, the design feels exciting and modern. It allows travelers to stay cheaply and compactly. For others, it feels claustrophobic. The smallness becomes oppressive. Even though the layout is efficient, it can create stress for those unused to such tight quarters. Here, illogical design comes not from chaos, but from pushing efficiency beyond comfort. Around the world, abandoned theme parks show yet another kind of strange space. When the rides stop running and the crowds disappear, what remains feels eerie. Walkways twist around rusting attractions. Signs point to shows that no longer exist. A roller coaster stands silent, its tracks leading into nothing. Without the energy of visitors, the park's layout no longer makes sense. It becomes a surreal landscape, part ruin and part dream. People who explore these places talk about the unsettling feeling of moving through spaces built for joy that now only echo emptiness. These abandoned parks highlight how context shapes our experience of space. When full of life, a park's winding paths feel playful. Without that life, the same paths seem meaningless. The physical design does not change, but its logic does. The rides and buildings stay in place, yet their purpose vanishes. This shift shows how even well-designed spaces can turn strange once their function disappears. Consider a small group walking through an old, empty park at dusk. The setting sun casts long shadows across broken benches. A map at the entrance still lists attractions that no longer stand. As the group moves deeper in, the paths loop back in ways that seem wrong. It feels as if the park itself is folding in on them. The experience is more than visual. It affects the body, causing unease. The brain searches for patterns that no longer exist and finds only fragments. In each of these cases, the Winchester Mystery House, confusing offices, Brasília, capsule hotels, and abandoned parks, the design creates a reaction beyond simple frustration. It changes how people feel and behave. A house built from grief becomes a maze of sorrow. An office without clear paths becomes a machine that wears down its workers. A city designed to be bold becomes hard to navigate. A hotel's perfect efficiency creates unease. A park's joyful layout turns haunting when life leaves it. Illogical architecture takes many forms, but it always challenges the relationship between people and space. It shows that design is not just about walls and floors, but about the experience of moving through them. When that experience breaks down, the space itself begins to feel alive, as if it has a will of its own. People respond with confusion, fear, or awe, depending on the context. Sometimes the effect is beautiful, like art made of stone and steel. Other times it is painful, like a puzzle no one asked to solve. In the end, every illogical building tells a story. The Winchester House tells of a woman trying to outbuild her grief. A modern office tells of a company growing without direction. Brasília tells of planners reaching for perfection and missing the human scale. Capsule hotels tell of a culture balancing space and comfort. Abandoned parks tell of time passing and purpose fading. These stories remind us that architecture is never neutral. It reflects the choices, mistakes, and dreams of the people who shape it, and it shapes those who enter its walls in return. From the moment humans began to build, they looked up. The first shelters were low and practical, meant only to block the wind and rain. But soon, builders started stacking stones higher, reaching for the sky. A taller structure meant safety, power, and visibility. From the top of a tower, you could see enemies approaching or survey the land you ruled. Building upward became a way to rise above others, both physically and symbolically. In ancient Mesopotamia, ziggurats climbed into the air like stairways for the gods. Each level rose above the last, wide at the base and narrow at the top, as if the builders were shaping mountains by hand. In Egypt, the pyramids took the same idea to an even greater scale. Their weight pressed deep into the earth, yet their sharp peaks pointed to the heavens. For centuries, these structures stood as proof that humans could bend stone to their will. As time passed, towers grew thinner and lighter. Medieval builders reached higher with Gothic cathedrals. Their pointed arches and flying buttresses shifted weight in clever ways, making walls taller and windows larger. People standing inside these cathedrals felt as though they were looking into another world. The stones seemed to float above them, held up by nothing more than faith and skill. The fascination with height never faded. In the 19th century, iron and steel changed the rules again. The Eiffel Tower shocked Parisians when it was built. Some thought it was ugly, even dangerous, but it stood firm, showing that metal could reach where stone could not. Soon, skyscrapers rose in cities like New York and Chicago. The skyline itself became a sign of progress. Building outward brought its own challenges. Bridges stretched across rivers and canyons. Some failed, like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, which twisted apart in strong winds. Each failure taught engineers new lessons about materials and forces. Over time, they learned to build structures that seemed to defy gravity. Suspension bridges floated over water on cables as thin as spider silk. Domes spanned vast spaces without interior supports. Modern engineering made designs possible that earlier builders could only dream about. Computers allowed architects to test shapes before construction began. Stronger materials opened new options. Glass could form walls without visible frames. Steel could twist into spirals and loops. Buildings no longer had to follow simple vertical lines. They could curve and lean as if frozen in motion. Consider a tower that leans so far it looks ready to fall. Without careful calculation, it would collapse under its own weight. With the right balance of materials, it stands solid, even as it appears fragile. Visitors walking at its base feel a mix of awe and unease. They trust the structure, but their senses tell them it should not be possible. This tension is part of what makes gravity-defying architecture so powerful. It plays with the boundary between what seems stable and what feels impossible. Some architects now look beyond leaning towers and twisting bridges. They imagine buildings that do not touch the ground at all. Georges Kachaamy calls this idea gravity-defiant architecture, or GDA. Instead of sitting on foundations, these structures would float in the air. The concept feels like science fiction, but Kachaamy treats it as a serious question. What would it mean to live in a building that never rests on the earth? Kachaamy imagines cities suspended above the land, hovering like clouds. People would move between them on footbridges or small flying vehicles. From above, the earth would remain open and untouched. Forests could grow without roads cutting through them. Rivers could flow without dams. The human footprint would no longer scar the ground. The practical challenges are enormous. A floating building needs a way to stay aloft. It might use magnetic fields, advanced propulsion systems, or some technology we have not yet invented. It must also stay stable against wind and weather. Safety becomes as important as structure. If a house floats, what prevents it from drifting into another house? If a city floats, how do you anchor it during a storm? These questions turn imagination into engineering problems. Beyond the practical, there are philosophical questions. Humans have always built in direct contact with the earth. Foundations are more than structural. They are symbolic. A foundation ties a building to a place. It marks ownership and permanence. A floating structure challenges that bond. If a house hovers, who owns the land beneath it? If a city can move, what does it mean to belong to a location? Imagine standing on the balcony of a floating apartment. The ground is far below, visible through shifting clouds. You look out and see other buildings drifting at different heights. At first, the sight feels thrilling. Then you notice the lack of roots. There is no street, no yard, no solid connection to the earth. For some, this freedom would feel like release. For others, it might feel like disconnection. Kachaamy's vision forces us to rethink ideas of community and identity. Neighborhoods are built on shared spaces like parks and plazas. If buildings float, how do those spaces change? Do people gather in the air, or do they descend to the ground for festivals and markets? Even simple acts, like walking a dog or planting a garden, take on new meaning when there is no soil beneath your feet. The idea of airborne cities may seem far off, but it continues a pattern that began thousands of years ago. Every step upward, from ziggurats to cathedrals to skyscrapers, pushed against gravity. Each new height seemed impossible until it became normal. Floating architecture would be the next step in that line. It would not just reach higher, it would leave the ground behind entirely. Consider a future city built according to Kachaamy's vision. From the distance, it looks like a cluster of clouds, glowing softly at night. As you approach, you see bridges connecting the floating structures. People move calmly along these bridges, their paths lit by gentle lights. Beneath them, Forests stretch unbroken to the horizon. No highways cut across the land. No rooftops block the sky. Inside one of these buildings, the design reflects its freedom from the ground. Rooms can be arranged without concern for gravity pulling in a single direction. Floors curve into walls. Ceilings slope into open terraces. The entire space feels fluid, like a living organism. The sense of movement is subtle but constant. Even when the structure does not shift, you feel as if you are part of something that could. This vision may never come to pass, or it may arrive in ways we cannot predict. But it draws on the same impulse that led people to stack stones into towers and stretch bridges across rivers. The fight against gravity is not just a technical challenge, it is a symbol of human ambition. To float above the earth is to declare independence from it, to imagine a way of living that is not bound by weight or soil. Floating cities are the ultimate expression of building upward and outward. They take the ancient desire to rise and push it beyond the limits of stone, steel, and glass. Whether they remain dreams or become reality, they remind us that architecture is not only about shelter. It is about exploring what it means to exist in space, to shape the very forces that hold us down, and to ask what might happen if we learned to let go. On a street corner in Prague, two buildings seem to dance. One curves inward like a waist mid-step. The other rises straight, as if steadying its partner. This is the Dancing House, designed by architect Vlado Milunic with Frank Gehry. From some angles, it looks like it is swaying. Its glass tower bends in ways that seem unstable, almost alive. When it was first proposed, many people hated it. They saw it as an insult to the city's historic skyline of domes and spires. Some called it ugly. Others worried it would fall, convinced that a building shaped like a dancer could not stand for long. The debate was fierce, but the structure went up anyway. When finished, it proved that careful engineering could make the impossible safe. Its curved glass walls are supported by a strong frame hidden beneath the surface. The building does not actually move, but it gives the illusion of motion. Today, it is one of Prague's most famous landmarks. People who once protested now bring visitors to see it. The Dancing House shows how a building can challenge not only gravity, but also public opinion. It asks viewers to see stability and instability at the same time, to accept that something which looks fragile can, in fact, endure. Where the Dancing House seems playful, Fallingwater feels serene. Designed by Lloyd Wright in the 1930s, this house was built over a rushing waterfall in rural Pennsylvania. Wright wanted the structure to blend with nature rather than dominate it. To do this, he used cantilevers, horizontal beams anchored only at one end. These beams stretch out over the water like diving boards. The house appears to hover above the stream, supported by nothing visible. The effect is breathtaking. Visitors hear the constant sound of the waterfall beneath their feet as they walk through rooms that seem to float. The design makes the house feel like part of the landscape, as if it grew there on its own. But the very feature that makes Fallingwater beautiful also makes it fragile. Cantilevers must carry enormous weight without bending or cracking. Wright pushed the limits of the materials available at the time. Even during construction, engineers warned that the beams might not hold. Wright insisted they would. For decades, the house stood, but cracks slowly appeared. By the 1990s, parts of the structure were sagging. Preservation teams stepped in to reinforce the beams with modern steel supports hidden from view. Fallingwater remains open to visitors, but it requires constant care. It is a reminder that defying gravity often means ongoing battle rather than final victory. The house still stands because people continue to fight against the forces that try to pull it down. If Fallingwater is quiet and natural, the CCTV headquarters in Beijing is bold and almost aggressive. Designed by Rem Koolhaas and Ole Sharon, it does not rise straight like a normal skyscraper. Instead, it forms a loop. Two towers grow upward, then bend toward each other, connecting at the top and bottom. The shape looks like a massive arch frozen in mid-step. From a distance, it seems impossible. How can so much weight hang in midair without collapsing? Building it required extraordinary engineering. The structure had to resist not only gravity, but also earthquakes, which are common in the region. The connecting sections were some of the most difficult parts to construct. Engineers used giant steel trusses to distribute the weight evenly. For weeks, workers installed the final pieces while the city watched anxiously. A single mistake could have sent the entire loop crashing down. When it opened, the building sparked intense discussion. Some praised its daring shape and symbolic meaning. The loop represents a continuous flow of information, fitting for China's central television network. Others criticized it as wasteful or overly complex. To many, it looks less like a tower and more like a colossal sculpture. Whether loved or hated, it cannot be ignored. The CCTV headquarters forces viewers to reconsider what a skyscraper can be. It proves that even the most unorthodox vision can be made real through careful planning and immense effort. In Montreal, another building challenges expectations, though in a quieter way. The Montreal Tower, part of the city's Olympic Stadium complex, leans at an angle of 45 degrees. It is the tallest leaning structure in the world, higher even than the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa. Unlike Pisa, however, its tilt was intentional. Engineers designed it this way to support cables that hold up the stadium's roof. From a distance, it looks like a giant frozen in the act of falling forward. During construction, many locals doubted it would ever stand. They feared it would topple in a storm or under its own weight. Even after completion, some people refused to go inside, uneasy at the thought of being in a building that leans so far. Over time, those fears faded. The tower became a symbol of Montreal's ambition and resilience. Visitors now ride elevators up the slanted structure to view the city below. What once seemed dangerous now inspires pride. These four buildings, Dancing House, Fallingwater, CCTV headquarters, and Montreal Tower, show different ways of defying gravity. The Dancing House uses illusion. Its curves suggest motion and instability without actually risking collapse. Fallingwater uses nature itself, extending over a waterfall so gracefully that it seems to float. The CCTV headquarters uses raw strength, balancing massive steel beams in a way that bends the idea of a skyscraper. The Montreal Tower uses a deliberate tilt to combine beauty and function. Each design faced doubt and resistance. In Prague, people argued over aesthetics. In Pennsylvania, engineers worried about structural failure. In Beijing, builders faced the risk of disaster during construction. In Montreal, fear of leaning gave way to acceptance. In every case, the final structure became more than just a building. It became a conversation about what humans can achieve and what they are willing to risk. Imagine standing at the base of the Dancing House, looking up as its glass walls twist above you. The building seems to sway in the breeze, even though you know it is still. Now picture walking through Fallingwater, hearing the rush of the waterfall below. The floor beneath you feels solid, yet you are aware that only a few beams keep you suspended over empty space. In Beijing, you stand under the central section of the CCTV headquarters. You tilt your head back to see the massive loop stretch overhead, a shape so foreign it almost feels alive. Finally, you ascend the Montreal Tower, riding at an angle that makes your stomach lurch, until you step out and see the city spread beneath you. These moments show the emotional power of gravity-defying architecture. The challenge is not only technical, but also psychological. Such buildings change how people feel. They create awe, fear, excitement, and sometimes resistance. They prove that architecture is more than shelter. It is a dialogue between vision and reality, a balancing act between what the eye believes and what the body knows. In the end, these structures stand because someone dared to imagine them and others dared to build them. Gravity pulls at every stone and beam, but human will pushes back. The result is a series of landmarks that seem to hover on the edge of the impossible, inviting everyone who sees them to believe, if only for a moment, that anything can rise. Above the clouds, entire cities drift like islands in the sky. They hover in silence, held up by forces invisible to the eye. From below, they look like mirages, shifting in the sunlight. This is the vision of Georges Kachaamy, an architect who believes the future of humanity might not rest on land at all. His concept, the Rising Oasis Saga, imagines floating cities designed to escape the pressures of a crowded and fragile planet. Kachaamy's idea began with a simple question: what if buildings no longer touch the ground? Traditional cities consume vast amounts of land. Forests are cleared, rivers rerouted, and coastlines reshaped to make way for human settlement. The scars are visible from space. As populations grow and seas rise from climate change, the strain on the Earth increases. Kachaamy proposes a radical solution. Instead of expanding outward, he imagines expanding upward, beyond gravity itself. These airborne cities would be self-contained ecosystems, hovering at safe distances above land or water. Below them, nature would recover. Fields could return to forests. Wetlands could spread without being drained. Humans would live above the damage they once caused, leaving the surface free for other species. From above, a visitor would see green stretching unbroken, as if the earth had been healed by the absence of cities. At first glance, this vision feels utopian. Imagine living in a tower that floats above the clouds, surrounded by gardens and open air. There are no roads, no traffic noise, no crowded sidewalks. Transportation happens through small personal vehicles or sky bridges connecting one floating district to another. The ground below is not paved or polluted, but wild and whole. For people who fear the chaos of modern cities, this might seem like paradise, but not everyone sees it that way. A floating city could also feel detached, cut off from the world beneath it. If only the wealthy can afford to live in these airborne oases, they become symbols of division rather than unity. The surface would remain home to those left behind, while the privileged rise above in literal separation. What looks like escape to some might look like abandonment to others. The floating city becomes a metaphor for inequality, a place where those with power lift themselves out of sight while others bear the weight of what remains. The practical challenges are just as complex. A floating structure must resist wind, storms, and constant motion. It must have stable energy sources to keep it aloft day and night. Food, water, and waste systems must all be self-sustaining. Every part of life, from housing to hospitals, has to fit into a space without natural ground beneath it. The technology required for this would be immense. Consider the energy demands alone. Keeping a single building hovering might take as much power as a small town. Now multiply that by an entire city. The paradox is clear. To reduce the environmental footprint on land, you may create an even larger footprint in the sky. Clean energy sources like solar or wind could help, but storage and distribution would remain difficult. The city might save forests below only to consume enormous resources above. There is also the question of stability. Imagine living in a home that floats hundreds of feet or even miles above the earth. Most days, it might feel solid and safe. But during a severe storm, the structure could sway or shift. Even if the danger is minimal, the perception of risk would affect people's behavior. Would they trust the invisible systems holding them up? Would they feel at home in a place that never touches the ground? Kachaamy's concept also forces us to think about identity and belonging. Traditional cities are rooted in geography. A Parisian is tied to the streets of Paris, a New Yorker to the grid of Manhattan. The land itself shapes the culture. A floating city has no such anchor. If it drifts over different regions or even countries, where does it belong? Its culture might become global and fluid, but it could also lack the deep connections that come from living in a fixed place. Picture a child growing up in a floating city. She has never walked barefoot on soil. She sees forests and oceans from above, but rarely touches them. Her world is entirely man-made. For her, the natural world might seem distant, like a picture in a book. This distance could foster a new respect for nature as something to be protected and admired. Or it could create apathy, as if the earth below no longer matters because life happens far above it. The environmental benefits are tempting. If cities no longer require land, entire ecosystems could recover. Species driven to the brink of extinction might return. Rivers could flow freely again. Carbon-storing forests could grow without threat. The air might even become cleaner as ground-based vehicles and factories vanish. In theory, floating cities could give the planet a chance to heal while still supporting human civilization. Yet there is a danger in mistaking technological spectacle for true sustainability. A floating city might look futuristic and green, with gleaming towers and sky gardens, but its construction could demand vast resources. Mining, manufacturing, and transport on a massive scale would be needed to build and maintain it. The project might end up consuming more energy than it saves. Consider a simple comparison. A dense, walkable city on land can house millions with relatively low energy use if designed well. Public transit, efficient buildings, and renewable energy systems can reduce environmental harm without leaving the ground. Floating cities risk skipping over these simpler solutions in favor of something far more complex and expensive. The question becomes whether the vision serves the planet or simply dazzles the eye. There are smaller, more immediate uses for the concept. Imagine a coastal village threatened by rising seas. Instead of abandoning their home, the residents could move to a cluster of floating platforms anchored just offshore. These platforms would rise and fall with the tide, protecting them from floods. Unlike Kachaamy's airborne cities, these would stay close to the surface, using proven technologies like buoyancy and renewable energy. The scale is modest, but the impact is real. In contrast, a full airborne city would require leaps in science that have not yet been achieved. Magnetic levitation could keep structures hovering, but only with massive energy inputs. Anti-gravity technology remains in the realm of theory. Until such breakthroughs occur, floating cities remain dreams. Still, dreams have power. The Rising Oases saga pushes people to imagine alternatives. It challenges the assumption that cities must always grow outward, devouring land and resources. Even if the exact vision never comes true, parts of it might inspire new approaches to urban design. Perhaps future cities will not float above the clouds, but they might rise above their old habits of destruction. Kachaamy's vision hovers between hope and warning. It promises a future where humans live lightly on the earth, leaving space for other forms of life. At the same time, it risks creating a world where the privileged escape into the sky while the rest remain below. Whether it becomes utopia or dystopia depends not only on technology, but on the choices made by those who decide who gets to rise and who is left behind. A building can rise tall, gleaming with glass and steel, and still cast a shadow that has nothing to do with the sun. The act of building is never neutral. It changes the land it stands on, the people who use it, and those who are pushed aside to make space for it. When architects and developers focus only on what is possible, they risk forgetting what is right. A tower that defies gravity may stand as proof of human skill, but it can also reveal deep moral cracks beneath its foundation. There is always a line between what can be built and what should be built. Technology allows for astonishing feats: bridges that stretch across vast distances, stadiums that seat thousands, towers that seem to pierce the clouds. Yet possibility alone does not justify action. The question must shift from can we to should we. A building is not just an object, it is a statement about values, priorities, and power. Consider a luxury resort built on a coastline once home to small fishing villages. The developers arrive with promises of jobs and progress. They bring heavy machines that carve roads through mangroves and flattened dunes. Families are offered small payouts to leave their land. Some refuse and are forced out. When the resort opens, its private beaches and infinity pools shine in travel magazines. Visitors sip cocktails while, just a few miles away, The former residents struggle to survive without access to the waters that sustained them for generations. This is exploitation made visible in architecture. The beauty of the resort hides the harm beneath it. The workers who built it may have been paid poorly or exposed to unsafe conditions. The people displaced by it are erased from its story. To outsiders, it is a paradise. To those who lost their homes, it is a wound. Environmental destruction often follows close behind. Clearing land for construction can destroy habitats and disrupt ecosystems. A single building might not seem like a threat, but entire developments can reshape landscapes. A dam built to generate power might flood forests and villages. A skyscraper might require so much concrete and steel that its carbon footprint outweighs any benefit it brings. Imagine a rainforest cleared to build a new city. Roads slice through once thick vegetation. Concrete covers the soil and animals disappear. The city's residents enjoy modern conveniences, but the loss to the planet is irreversible. Nature has no voice in the planning meetings, yet it pays the highest price. This destruction is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet and gradual, like a coastline eroding under the weight of new seawalls or farmland turning to desert after water is diverted for urban use. The clash between excessive luxury and surrounding poverty adds another layer of tension. In many cities, gleaming high-rises stand next to crumbling neighborhoods. Wealth is concentrated in towers with rooftop gardens and private gyms, while nearby streets lack clean water or safe housing. The contrast is stark and painful. Architecture becomes a physical map of inequality. Picture a city where a single tower contains apartments that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. Each unit sits empty most of the year, owned by investors who visit only occasionally. At street level, families live in crowded tenements with peeling walls and broken plumbing. The tower shines at night, lit like a beacon, while the surrounding blocks remain dark. This image says more than any speech about who matters and who does not. To navigate these challenges, architecture needs a moral framework. 3 pillars can help guide decisions: equity, sustainability, and cultural respect. Equity asks who benefits from a project and who bears its costs. A public library serves many. A private mansion serves one. A new transit system might connect communities, while a toll road might cut through them and make travel harder for those who cannot afford the fees. Equity also considers labor. The people who build structures often face dangerous conditions. Construction is one of the most hazardous jobs in the world. If a building rises on the backs of underpaid or mistreated workers, its beauty comes at too high a price. Fair wages, safe work sites, and clear protections are as important as any blueprint. Sustainability focuses on the relationship between a building and the environment. A sustainable design uses resources carefully, reduces waste, and works with the natural landscape rather than against it. This does not mean freezing progress or avoiding construction altogether. It means balancing human needs with the planet's limits. Imagine 2 bridges built over the same river. The first is made with local materials, designed to let water flow freely and wildlife move safely beneath it. The second is built quickly and cheaply, blocking fish migration and causing floods upstream. Both bridges solve the immediate problem of crossing the river. Only one respects the larger system it enters. Sustainability is the difference between a temporary fix and a long-term solution. Cultural respect addresses how architecture interacts with the communities it serves. Buildings do not exist in a vacuum. They sit within histories, traditions, and identities. Ignoring these can cause harm, even if the structure itself is sound. Consider a sacred site where generations have gathered for ceremonies. If developers build a shopping mall on that land without consultation, they erase part of the community's heritage. Even well-meaning projects can cause pain if they impose outside visions on local spaces. Cultural respect means listening, collaborating, and ensuring that design reflects the people who will live with it. When these 3 pillars are ignored, architecture becomes dangerous. A project might succeed technically while failing ethically. A skyscraper may resist earthquakes but deepen inequality. A resort may boost tourism while erasing ecosystems. A museum may win design awards while silencing the voices of the community it claims to represent. There are moments when these conflicts come into sharp focus. During the construction of the 2022 World Cup stadiums in Qatar, reports surfaced of migrant workers laboring in extreme heat without adequate protection. Many died. The stadiums stood ready for the games, gleaming under bright lights, but they carried the weight of those lives. Spectators saw sports and celebration. Activists saw exploitation and neglect. The stadiums became symbols not just of athletic achievement, but of ethical failure. On a smaller scale, ethical fault lines can appear in everyday decisions. A city might approve a new apartment complex that blocks sunlight from a public park. A developer might choose cheaper materials that release toxins into the air. These choices do not make headlines, but they shape the lives of those affected. The tension between physical possibility and ethical responsibility will never fully disappear. As technology advances, the gap between what can be built and what should be built will grow. Architects, engineers, and planners must decide again and again where they stand. Every blueprint carries a set of values, whether stated or hidden. Every foundation is also a promise or a threat. The challenge is not just to imagine buildings that stand against gravity, but to create ones that stand for justice. A tower can rise to great heights and still fail if it leaves behind the people and places it was meant to serve. Architecture has the power to shape more than skylines. It shapes relationships, memories, and futures. When it forgets this, even the most impressive structure becomes hollow. At night, the skyline glows with lights from towers that seem to scrape the stars. In cities like New York, Hong Kong, and Dubai, these towers are symbols of wealth and ambition. Their walls are made of glass and steel, their lobbies lined with marble. Yet many of the apartments inside them sit empty. They are not homes, but investments, purchased by the ultra-wealthy as places to park money rather than live. Below these towers, on the same streets, people sleep on benches, in shelters, or under bridges. In New York, some of the tallest residential buildings in the world stand along a stretch of Manhattan known as Billionaire's Row. From a distance, they look like slender needles reaching far above older buildings. Inside, many units are dark year-round. Meanwhile, the city struggles with a housing crisis. Shelters are full, and families wait for months to find affordable apartments. The contrast is stark: luxury in the sky, desperation on the ground. Hong Kong faces a similar paradox. Skyscrapers rise higher every year, packed with expensive units. At the same time, thousands of residents live in cage homes, tiny spaces barely large enough to lie down. The sight of these cramped wire enclosures sits uneasily beside gleaming towers. In Dubai, the image is different, but just as troubling. Migrant workers build luxury hotels and malls under extreme heat, often for low wages and with few protections. Tourists enjoy opulence while the labor that made it possible remains invisible. This split between excess and need is not just about economics. It is about how cities choose to allocate space and resources. The empty towers are more than symbols of inequality. They are physical barriers, walls that separate those with access from those without. The architecture itself enforces the divide, rising higher as the problems below deepen. Displacement often follows when development accelerates. In Rio de Janeiro, preparations for the Olympics and World Cup brought promises of progress. New stadiums, transit systems, and hotels were built to host the world's attention. But these projects came at a cost. Entire neighborhoods, known as favelas, were cleared to make way for infrastructure. Families were forced out, sometimes with little notice or compensation. For many residents, the favela was not just housing. It was community, history, and identity. Streets had names, shops had regular customers, and neighbors supported one another. When bulldozers arrived, that network was shattered. Some families were moved to distant housing blocks, far from jobs and schools. Others were left to find shelter on their own. Walking through these areas after the clearings, you could see fragments of lives left behind: a broken toy, a faded photograph, the outline of a home's foundation. To visitors watching the games on television, the city looked vibrant and modern. To those displaced, it felt like erasure. The buildings that rose in place of their homes did not represent them. They represented a version of Rio built for outsiders, a stage set for the world to see. The loss of heritage is not limited to urban areas. In Hawaii, the summit of Mauna Kea has long been sacred to native Hawaiians. It is a place of spiritual importance, tied to stories and ceremonies passed down through generations. When plans were announced to build a massive telescope on the mountain, protests erupted. Supporters of the telescope argued it would advance science and expand our understanding of the universe. Opponents argued that it would desecrate sacred land and ignore the voices of those who have lived there for centuries. The conflict was not simply about one building. It was about whose values mattered, whose vision for the land would prevail. Images of protesters standing in the road, blocking construction vehicles, spread worldwide. Some carried signs, others chanted prayers. The standoff revealed how architecture can become a battleground for culture and belief. A telescope may seem like progress to scientists, but to the community, it felt like a wound carved into the earth. Similar conflicts play out in less visible ways. Across the globe, resorts and vacation homes are built on land sacred to indigenous peoples. Developers see empty beaches or rolling hills as opportunities for profit. They bring in bulldozers and blueprints without asking permission or listening to local voices. The result is not only physical displacement, but spiritual harm. Sacred spaces lose their meaning when turned into playgrounds for tourists. Environmental exploitation often hides behind the glamour of ambitious projects. In Dubai, the Palm Islands are among the most striking examples. Built from sand dredged from the sea, these artificial islands form giant palm-shaped patterns visible from space. Luxury villas, hotels, and malls line their edges. From a marketing perspective, the islands are a triumph. From an environmental perspective, they are a disaster. The dredging process damaged marine ecosystems, destroying coral reefs and disturbing fish populations. Natural currents were altered, causing erosion and water stagnation. The coastline that once shifted with tides and storms now struggles under the weight of artificial structures. What looks like paradise in photographs is, in reality, a fragile balance held together by constant maintenance. Other projects have similar effects. When wetlands are filled to create building sites, they lose their ability to absorb floodwaters. When forests are cleared for new developments, carbon stored in trees is released into the atmosphere, worsening climate change. Each decision ripples outward, creating consequences far beyond the construction site. Consider a small fishing village near one of these projects. Before the development, fishermen relied on predictable tides and healthy reefs. After the dredging began, the fish vanished. Boats returned empty, and livelihoods collapsed. The new resort offers jobs, but they are low-paying and seasonal. What was once a self-sufficient community becomes dependent on the very industry that disrupted it. These case studies reveal how ethical violations are woven into architecture. A tower can be structurally perfect and visually stunning, while standing on foundations of injustice. A stadium can host cheers and celebration, while silencing the voices of those displaced to build it. A telescope can open the sky to discovery, while closing the door on cultural respect. The patterns repeat. Wealth concentrates at the top, while the vulnerable are pushed aside. Progress is measured by skylines and tourist numbers, rather than by the well-being of those affected. The physical structures are only part of the story. The hidden costs, displacement, erasure, destruction, are just as real, even if they do not appear on postcards or in glossy brochures. Imagine walking through a city after midnight. The towers shine with empty windows, while a man sleeps in a doorway below. His blanket is thin, his body curled against the cold. A block away, a luxury lobby sits bright and silent, guarded by cameras and security gates. The contrast is not accidental. It is built into the very design of the city. Architecture has the power to create shelter, connection, and beauty. It also has the power to harm. When buildings rise without regard for equity, sustainability, or cultural respect, they become monuments to imbalance. They stand not only as physical objects, but as reminders of choices made and voices ignored. Each case tells a story, and those stories linger long after the last stone is set in place. Some buildings seem to exist in defiance of common sense, as if they were sketches brought to life before anyone checked whether they could stand. These structures play with balance, weight, and perception, forcing people to question what is possible. Each one carries a story of ambition and risk, a moment when builders decided to challenge gravity itself. In the Italian city of Udine, the Hypo Alpe Adria bank leans so far that it appears ready to collapse. Its tilt is intentional, a bold design meant to symbolize forward movement and change. When it opened, many locals were unsettled. Walking past, you feel your body tense as if preparing for impact. The building's weight is distributed through hidden supports, but the illusion remains powerful. It shouldn't exist because every instinct tells you it will topple, yet it stays steady through precise engineering. The cube houses in Rotterdam, Netherlands, take this sense of unease further. Architect Piet Blom designed each unit as a tilted cube balanced on a hexagonal pillar. From the street, the houses look like a forest of precariously balanced blocks. Inside, walls and floors meet at strange angles. Residents must adapt to living in spaces where nothing feels level. Blom's idea was to create a village within the city, but the result challenges the very idea of a home. It seems impossible that such tilted structures can be safe, yet decades later they still stand, a living experiment in unconventional design. In Washington, D.C., the Needle Tower rises like a fragile sculpture about to fall. Created by artist Kenneth Snelson, it is a tensegrity structure, its parts held together not by solid joints, but by a balance of tension and compression. Metal tubes float in space, connected by cables that pull in opposite directions. From below, it appears weightless, as if a single touch could send it crashing down. The engineering behind it is exact, relying on physics as much as art. The Needle Tower exists on the edge of collapse, a visual trick that challenges the viewer's trust in stability. The Haydar Aliyev Center in Baku, Azerbaijan, flows like fabric caught in a breeze. Designed by Zaha Hadid, it has no sharp corners or straight lines. Its white surface sweeps upward and downward in curves that seem to defy structure. The most startling feature is the lack of visible support. Visitors step inside and find vast open halls with ceilings that appear to float. Hidden beneath the smooth exterior is a complex network of steel frames. Without this skeleton, the building would slump like a collapsed tent. Its seamless appearance is a deception, one that makes people feel as though they are walking inside a cloud. In Rio de Janeiro, the Museum of Tomorrow was built to symbolize a sustainable future. Its design, by Santiago Calatrava, features long overhangs that stretch out like the wings of a giant bird. These wings shade the building and move with the sun, reducing energy use. Yet the museum also embodies a paradox. Its construction required immense resources and disrupted the surrounding waterfront. It preaches environmental balance while standing on land reshaped by human ambition. The structure looks ready to take flight, but its message is weighed down by contradiction. In the English countryside, the balancing barn hangs halfway over a slope, with one end suspended in midair. Visitors walk through it feeling both excitement and unease. At the midpoint, the ground disappears beneath you, replaced by a view of open space through a glass floor. The illusion of fragility is deliberate. Engineers used counterweights hidden in the grounded section to keep the structure stable. Without this unseen balance, the barn would tilt and fall. It should not be possible to live in a house half in the air, yet the careful calculations make it safe. The Seattle Central Library looks like a puzzle assembled from glass and steel. Its floors do not stack neatly. Instead, platforms float at different levels, connected by bridges and ramps. From outside, the building appears to twist in on itself. Inside, visitors move through spaces that feel like separate worlds. The challenge was to create a structure that could hold so many shifting elements without collapsing under its own weight. Engineers solved this by using a diamond-shaped steel frame. The result is a library that feels like a city within a city, constantly surprising those who wander through it. In Denmark, the Museum of Rock juts outward with a massive overhang that seems to dare gravity to pull it down. Visitors walking beneath it feel a mix of awe and fear. The building seems ready to tip forward, yet it stays firmly in place. Engineers used a deep foundation and reinforced beams to distribute the weight. The museum's design reflects the energy and rebellion of rock music, but it also tests the nerves of those who step inside. Its overhang challenges the instinct to seek shelter under something stable. Montreal's Olympic Tower leans at a dramatic 45 degrees, making it the tallest leaning structure in the world. Unlike the Leaning Tower of Pisa, its tilt was planned. The tower supports cables that once held up a retractable stadium roof. During construction, many doubted it would ever stand. Some feared it would fall before completion. Even today, visitors riding the slanted elevator to the top feel a moment of vertigo. The building's lean looks unnatural, as if it were frozen mid-fall. It remains a source of both pride and debate, a reminder of the risks taken during the city's Olympic dreams. One Central Park in Sydney, Australia, combines luxury living with environmental design. Its towers are covered in vertical gardens, with plants climbing the walls like living curtains. A giant mirrored panel reflects sunlight down onto shaded areas below. From a distance, the effect is stunning, a skyscraper that seems to merge with nature. But beneath the greenery lies another story. Building and maintaining these gardens requires constant water and energy. The project markets itself as sustainable, yet its true environmental cost is difficult to measure. The towers rise as symbols of green architecture. While questions about their long-term impact remain unanswered, these structures share a common thread. Each one looks like it should not be possible. A bank that leans, houses that tilt, a tower held by cables, a museum that hovers, a barn hanging over empty space. Their varied existence feels like a challenge to the laws of physics. But behind every illusion is careful calculation. Hidden supports, counterweights, and reinforced materials make the impossible real. For the people who encounter these buildings, the experience is visceral. Standing beneath the Hypo Alpe Adria Bank, you might instinctively step back. Entering the cube houses, you might stumble as your sense of balance adjusts. Looking up at the Needle Tower, you might hold your breath, certain it will fall. These reactions remind us that architecture is not only about sight. It is about the body, about how space makes us feel. Each building tells a story about ambition, innovation, and risk. They exist because someone dared to imagine them and others dared to build them. They show how far humans will go to challenge gravity, even when the result seems to hover between stability and collapse. In these structures, wonder and tension coexist, pulling at the mind like gravity pulls at the earth. A city is a story told in stone, steel, and glass. Its skyline reflects the choices of generations, their hopes and fears stacked layer by layer. Some buildings rise out of necessity, built to shelter, heal, or connect. Others emerge from ambition, symbols of wealth or power. Over time, certain structures push beyond the ordinary. They break rules and challenge expectations, defying not only the ground they stand on, but also the ideas that shape them. These acts of defiance can inspire wonder or unease, depending on what is being challenged. There are three ways buildings defy limits. The first is logic. When a design no longer follows reason, it becomes a puzzle for the senses. In this realm, hallways twist without purpose, doors open into walls, and staircases lead nowhere. Illogical architecture can be playful, like a dream brought to life, or it can be harmful, like a maze that traps rather than guides. The Winchester Mystery House stands as a perfect example. Bored of grief and superstition, it grew into a labyrinth with no clear plan. Modern offices with confusing layouts repeat this mistake, creating stress and wasted time. Illogical design shows how space can shape the mind, creating tension and disorientation even when the walls themselves are solid. The second form of defiance is gravity. These are buildings that seem physically impossible. Structures that appear to float, twist, or lean in ways that make the viewer hold their breath. History is full of attempts to reach higher and span farther, from ancient ziggurats to modern skyscrapers. Fallingwater balances over a rushing stream, its cantilevered decks daring nature to pull them down. The CCTV headquarters in Beijing bends upward and inward, forming a giant loop of steel and glass. The Montreal Tower leans at a dramatic 45 degrees, frozen in the moment before a fall. These structures are feats of engineering, but they are also statements. They show how far humans will go to prove that weight and mass can be overcome. The third defiance is harder to see, but cuts deeper. It is the defiance of ethics. Here, the question is not whether a building can stand, but whether it should. Some projects rise through the exploitation of vulnerable workers, like the stadiums in Qatar, built at the cost of many lives. Others destroy ecosystems, carving away wetlands or forests to make space for luxury resorts. Sometimes the harm is cultural, as when sacred land is taken for development. The protests at Mauna Kea in Hawaii reveal this struggle. A telescope meant to explore the heavens becomes a symbol of erasure for those whose traditions are bound to the mountain. These three forms of defiance, logic, gravity, ethics, intersect more often than we realize. A tower may twist and lean in ways that inspire awe, but if it displaces communities or deepens inequality, its beauty comes at a hidden cost. A museum may impress with its bold design, but if it confuses visitors or blocks access to public spaces, its form has failed its function. Every remarkable structure is more than an object. It is a decision, and decisions have consequences. Architecture does not simply reflect society, it shapes it. A courthouse with imposing columns sends a message about authority. A public park surrounded by open pathways speaks of inclusion. A gated community signals division, while a crowded housing block shows neglect. The built environment tells us who we are and who we might become. It reveals what a culture values, whether that is efficiency, beauty, status, or connection. Consider the luxury towers that stand empty while homelessness grows below. Their presence says something unspoken, that space can be hoarded like wealth, kept from those who need it most. These towers are not just homes without residents. They are monuments to imbalance, built on the belief that prestige matters more than people. By contrast, a well-designed public library or transit hub sends the opposite message. It welcomes and connects, showing that architecture can serve the many rather than the few. The central question, then, is not only technical or aesthetic, it is philosophical. What do we lose when we build without limits? The answer is not simple. When form breaks free from logic, we risk creating spaces that confuse and alienate. When ambition pushes against gravity, we risk failure and collapse. When greed overrides ethics, we risk harming those who cannot defend themselves. Each defiance has a price, even when the structure stands tall and gleaming. Imagine walking through a city 100 years from now. Towers float above the clouds, held aloft by technologies we cannot yet imagine. Bridges stretch like threads across the sky. Below, the earth is scarred by forgotten projects, places where nature never recovered. In this city of the future, you might marvel at the engineering, while feeling uneasy about what was sacrificed to achieve it. The question is not whether the buildings are impressive. The question is what they reveal about the people who built them. Responsible innovation means balancing imagination with accountability. It does not mean avoiding risk or settling for safe designs. It means understanding the impact of each choice. A bold idea can still be rooted in care. A tower can rise high without pushing others down. A city can grow without erasing the land beneath it. This balance requires more than technical skill. It requires listening to the voices of those affected, considering the long-term effects, and being willing to walk away from projects that cross the line between wonder and harm. Picture a group of architects gathered around a table, reviewing a model of a new development. The design is breathtaking: curving walkways, open gardens, towers that seem to hover. One person points out that the project will require relocating hundreds of families. Another raises concerns about the wetlands that will be drained. The room falls silent. The team must decide whether to move forward. In that moment, the choice is not only about design, it is about values. The built world is full of decisions like this, many made quietly and quickly. The results surround us, from the layout of a neighborhood to the skyline of a city. By looking closely, we can see the fingerprints of these choices. We can ask who was included, who was excluded, and what was lost. As you walk through your own city, look up at the buildings and ask questions. Why was this built? Who benefits from it? Who was displaced or ignored to make it possible? Some answers will be inspiring. Others will be uncomfortable. Both are necessary. When we see a twisting tower or a floating bridge, it is easy to be dazzled by the achievement, but awe should not replace inquiry. A building that defies gravity may be a triumph of engineering, but it is also a statement of intent. It tells us something about the people who imagined it and the society that allowed it to rise. The next time you stand before an extraordinary structure, pause before you admire it. Consider the hidden stories beneath its surface. Ask yourself a question that matters more than whether it can stand. Should it exist? In that question lies the future of architecture, and perhaps the future of the cities we call home.